I accidentally ended up in tea, and I was telling my friends at the front that the reason why I ended up in tea is because politicians stole from my family, and I could not fathom that my family were being robbed. And so I uprooted my entire life from England at a corporate job in London, England, working for the city of London. I basically decided that tea was going to be my baby. And so that was about 5 years ago, but I've only lived in Kenya for 3 years. So yeah, I'm sure you had my introduction. I think I'll get started. What is tea? So tea is basically, when we talk about tea, I think it's really important that we clarify exactly what we're talking about here. We're not talking about flowers steeped in water. That is just flowers steeped in water. When we talk about tea, we're talking about camellias and then slowly, and it's a plant and it grows all over the world. Uh, there are so many different types of tea, and I think I'm gonna do a run through of the different types. So there's something called white tea, which it's really easy to make. You basically just pluck the buds, put it to dry, and that's it. And then there's green tea, which will produce matcha. I don't know if anybody knows, but at the moment there's a massive decline in matcha, especially in Japan. And I'm gonna share some interesting stuff about that. There's also something called yellow tea, which is really rare and it has a very mild taste. And then there's purple tea. Uh, this morning I got a call from a colleague of mine in India, and he was telling me that Kenya has basically purported to the world that they are the ones who invented purple tea. And it's a flow that has been around for a very long time. So up until this morning, I generally believe that this was our baby and that this was something that we invented. And then there's black orthodox tea, which is the long fermented leaves, and it's honestly my favorite type of tea. And then the black CTC, which is the granules that are best for boiling. So white tea, I don't know if everyone can see on the picture, it's basically, all that happens is with a cultivar, so in tea, because it's a plant, you pluck the bud, which is the youngest part of the actual plant itself. So I'll just go back. You pluck the youngest part, so the big that's like sticking out, and that's the part that's plucked. And then you basically dry it in the shade for like 12 days. We did this on my farm just before, just at the end of June, beginning of July. And I just kept weeping when I went home, or into London. And everybody was going crazy for it because they were just bamboozled that we just made it on the farm. It's also the most expensive, it's one of the most expensive teas because it's so labor. It's so labor intense. It takes about 10 to 12 days to make. It's also one of the teas that's super low in caffeine, and it helps with calm. And in terms of taste, it tastes like it just tastes like water and flowers. It's like a really light taste. I think probably I can't describe what it tastes, but it's nice. Then there's green tea, which I'm sure many people have had. People who are into slimming tea, I hate to tell you, slimming tea is not really a thing. It didn't actually exist. People have been made to believe that it is, but green tea is one of the teas that they put in the slimming teas. And basically, it's firstly with antioxidants, and it's one of those teas whereby green tea is good. Like if you want to wake up, like you have a cup of green tea, essentially. Something called yellow tea, which is super, super rare. It's one of the rarest types of tea. We can't make all of these teas, by the way, in Kenya, but we'll get to talking about shortly. Then there's something called oolong tea, which is typically grown in Taiwan. And then there's something called milk oolong. And so milk oolong is probably my favorite tea because when you grow it and then you steep it in water, it tastes like a milk tea, but there's no milk in it. It's just the tea on its own. Yeah, like that's pretty cool, right? That just the plant on its own had like a milky tree taste. In terms of price, it's also one of the most expensive teas in the world as well. Herbal tea, which I genuinely believe up until this morning was a Kenyan invention, is actually not, which is heartbroken. I'm still sort of dealing with that trauma. Just has a reddish hue. So when you put it in water and then you add lemon to it, the lemon basically gives the liquor or the liquid a purplish hue. And that's how it becomes purple. And then there's something called Pu'er tea. This is like a cake. And so this is, again, one of the most interesting teas. But it's also one of the most expensive teas as well. Then there's something called black tea, black orthodox tea specifically. They're made from wineries. People call it a premium tea because it's the whole wheat. When we talk about black CTC, which stands for crushed Jericho, what we're talking about is essentially the tea that we're used to drinking, the granules. That's what we all know. That's what we all love. In Kenya, whenever I travel, people always ask me what the Kenyan tea drinking culture is. And I'm like, we literally just boil the shit out of it. Would add spices to it to give us some masala tea. So I want to do a quick thing on tea bags. And there are two types of tea bags. Not all tea bags are made equal. So there are paper tea bags, which are made from bleached paper, which is obviously not good for you. And then there's obviously the neo-sort of ones, which are made from plant fibers. So those are really good and it's safe to drink. So in Kenya, you're looking at brands like Wabanga Tea Company, Sturmy, Safari do a couple of those as well. And Katepa and Kerichigo have a range. So every time you buy tea, look on the back, look at what the ingredients and the tea are if you're going to drink tea bags. I want to now talk about the history of tea. So tea is originated from China. There are two different stories on when tea in China started and how it was sold. One story is that one emperor basically was boiling water and then some bees fell into this water and then he liked the taste and then that was tea. And that's one story. The other story is something completely different. And it's that it was brought in by the Shang dynasty and it was used as a medicinal product. Tea then moved into Japan by the Buddhist monks. And the Buddhist monks are the ones who are responsible for adding a historic or the cultural element to it. So they're the ones who created the ceremony. So I'm sure everybody has heard of Japanese tea drinking ceremonies and rituals. These are about 700 years old. And the reason why they started them, the monks anyway, is because when they were brought over from the Buddhist monks in China, their big idea was, okay, and how do we make this special? How do we make this interesting? And so remember when I was talking about the Kenyan tea drinking ritual, like Kenyan drinking culture, we kind of don't really have one, I guess, other than boiling tea and having it at every single event that we have. So now we come to India. So China was exporting most of their tea to the UK, to India specifically. The UK would drink so much tea that East India company were like, hey, we need to expand this. So they went to India and then they found tea already growing in a place called Aspen, which is naturally occurring. When it was naturally occurring, the British were like, oh, I think we should probably grow some more, but we should do it on a commercial scale. And so that's how Assam tea came to originate. They took land and then they planted all of this Assam around it. And then they went to a place called Darjeeling. So how Darjeeling came about was they basically decided that the British decided that they were going to go to a place called Darjeeling and they were going to plant the Chinese cultivar on Indian acidic soil. But let me explain why it's a cool tea. Assam typically has quite alkaline soil. It's similar to what we have in Kenya, right? So you're taking a crop that exists in one setting and taking it to a whole other setting, and then you're expecting the same thing to happen, but actually something completely different happened. And that's why Darjeeling is known as champagne of tea in the tea world. It's one of the most premium teas that you can find in India. All right, so that's a brief history of India, China, Japan, and how all that came about. So I want to talk about Kenya now. I briefly touched on colonialism and I've talked about the British East India Company, but let's talk about what that looks like in Kenya. So in Kenya, it's actually, Williamson Tea, who are wonderful conglomerates operating in Kericho, they say that they started planting tea in 1869, but actually they did not. They started in 1903. And why that's important is because the tea story in Kenya is a little bit different to what we have in India, what we have in China, and what we have in Japan. All these plantations in Kericho, places like Bomet, were established to basically expand the British Empire. And so now, when we get to independence, which was in 1963, when independence happened, they decided that they were going to democratize it, or what they call democratizing. And that was the birth of an organization called Keep Tea. So I'm really glad that you said it's an authority. And I don't know if you could read this, but I'm going to read, and this is literally copy and pasted from the website. KTDA is a private company owned by about 600,000 small older tea farmers. Did you hear that? Owned by 600,000 smallholder tea farmers. That's a really important thing for people to understand. KTP is not an authority, it's an agency. And the farmers are the ones. So if you're a tea farmer or you love someone the tea and they take tea to a KTP factory, you should tell your farmer, the person that you love, that they need to go and visit their factories. They own the factory. The factory belongs to them. There is no decision that can be made or that should be made about that factory without the input of farmers. So I want to go further. KTPA owns about 71 different factories around Kenya, including satellite ones. And then there are 9 subsidiaries that are associated to it. So that also includes KENYAN, aka KENYAN TEA Limited. KENYAN is a subsidiary of CTD. So I want to move on to Nyayo tea zones, right? Nyayo tea zones are really important. And I think I find it simple to say, but one of the good things that Boy did was introducing the Nyayo tea zone. And the Nyayo tea zone was basically created to stop wealthy Kenyans from buying up land. But the forest essentially acts as a buffer. So the interesting thing is about Nyayo tea zones is that they also deliver to KTB factories. But that's Nyayo tea zone, and I always think it's important to talk about them. When we also think about Kenya and the history of tea, we also have to talk about the multinational tea estates. So we've got Karirana, got Abuki, got all those are the ones that we've got. Well, formerly known as Sipes, but now known as Browns. We've also got Williamson's, and all of those are the ones who are responsible for driving a commodified tea as a commodity. So tea, as many people rightly equated out, it's not necessarily something that needs to be traded as commodity. It can be traded as a craft. And that's how you got India being known for Daji tea, the champagne of tea. There's no reason why Kenya cannot be ever known for having a premium tea. There's no reason at all. So when we think about Sri Lanka, we think about, say, tea. But as somebody rightly equated out, all of these teas are taken to the West and blended with other teas. So when I was in the UK, I went to the supermarket and I found something really interesting. I found that a lot of the teas that were on the shelves here were bought by brokers, and then on the back it says there's nothing there that said anything about Kenyan tea. And if it did say Kenyan tea, all it said is Kenyan black, and that's it. But there's no other mention of where in Kenya it comes from, the type of tea, who the farmers are. I mean, there are people like Fetri who are doing an amazing job, who are trying to put more money in farmers' pockets, but the reality is that still nobody really understands where tea, what Kenyan tea is, and that we're actually doing amazing things. So I want to now do a little bit of an economics deep dive. Economists, see here? Okay, all right. I think economists are going to enjoy this. That's really tiny. I don't know why it's so tiny. But anyway, it's supposed to be a comparative slide on global beverages, right? So thinking about tea, coffee, and cocoa. So those are known as soft commodities. Those are all traded around the world. And they all have a price, and then they all get sold in some sort of auction, right? So in the world, China is the number 1 producer of tea. India is second. Kenya is third. If Kenya is the number 3 producer of tea globally, how much money do you think we should be making from it? Right. But you look at a country, I don't know if anyone can see, but Japan is number 8, I believe, on those slides. Japan is a country that earns some of the most amount of money, but produces the least. Taiwan produces the bulk or the least amount of tea, but earns the most amount of money. Is it equality? We're all growing the same. We're all growing camellias and nexus. So something is happening, or I'm curious about. I know what's happening, but I'm curious about what anybody else thinks is the answer. So Japan mostly Japan at the moment have a massive pocketing reduction in terms of their matcha. I got a call from somebody in Switzerland who is interested in trying to do production in Kenya. Basically see the idea that it is actually feasibly possible for Kenyans to do it. So I want to look at Vietnam, right? And Vietnam's an interesting country because not many people talk about tea production in Vietnam. But the reason why Vietnam is so important is because Kenya actually is more expensive to produce tea than Vietnam. But yet Vietnam will overtake us this year in terms of production. So Kenya's tea production is actually falling. And one of the reasons why Kenya's tea production is falling right now is climate change. So anyone who follows me on Twitter, especially the engineers, like to tell me that climate change is not real. It's real. It's very real. I experience it on my farm all the time. I can't predict the weather anymore because of climate change. So anyway, Vietnam. Vietnam production costs are significantly lower than Kenya. And so that means that anybody who's trying to buy oxy, the commodity, is going to make more. So I want to move on to something completely different and talk about the wages of tea pickers, right? So in Kenya, the first law is for government mandated rate for unskilled laborers. And I take great issue with that because everybody thinks that tea picking is is a form of unskilled labor. Tea picking is one of those highly skilled labor. I can't, on my farm, I can't just have anybody pick tea. It needs to be somebody who is been trained, somebody who has experience. Otherwise, they will mess up my farm. So I want to also look at the second, which is the basic wages reality. So the basic wages reality, this is how much people are paid, right? How much on average? So it's between 8 to 15 shillings per kilo of tea pays. That, what can you do with that? So it comes to about 200 shillings a day. And most people will pay tea between 5 to 6 days a week, and they'll have a rest on Sunday. So you're talking about people who are living in abject poverty, right? But that's not the point of this. And then you've got the fair trade certified farm. So Duty Tea Factory, Maranga, is one of the best factories I think. But let me explain why I said that they're one of the best. It's because their leadership has done something with fair trade. They have regular sit downs with fair trade, and they talk about how can they increase their prices and their premiums for farmers. Duty Tea Factory, and this is why I said it's so important for people to go to their local tea factory, because unless you go, you're not going to know this. So I went to a meeting with fair trade, and that's when I found out my tea factory was fair trade. In my factory, you would never know this. I found out because fair trade told. Meaning something is happening to the premiums. When I, as a farmer, am not seeing those premiums, I'm sure other people deliver to places like Catporals are also not seeing those premiums. So what's going on with those fair trade? So anyway, how fair trade premiums work is essentially the fair trade committee will be given they'll be given this money back, and then they will be the ones to decide what they're going to do with it. From that, most people decide that they're going to put up a school, or they're going to do road, or they're going to do some sort of community development. So theoretically speaking, it doesn't actually go back to the farmer's pocket. What it does do is that it does do development in that particular area. So I guess if you have to have the opportunity to buy fair trade certified tea, please do it, because it does actually reach the farmers in one way or another. And if you ever get to see tea that has a specific name of the factory, always buy that, because then that also goes back to the farmers as well. So the reason why I talk a lot about farmers and farmer wages and farmer premiums, I think another lens to look at it from is also it's 70% of the labor on farms is done by women. So these systemic issues, the basically perpetuate poverty, and it basically puts us in a place whereby people are picking tea, but yeah, it's being sold at auction for X amount of dollar, and then being shipped over to the UK, and then being packed, and then being sold for a super premium. But the woman who takes this tea isn't seeing any of that money. And it doesn't make sense why she's living in abject poverty. So I think it's free. So I am in my introduction, they said that I'm a co-chair of something called Women in Tea. So they're really interesting. They found me on Instagram. They're like, you're pretty cool, days in tea. Would you like to be co-chair? Use risk money. I was like, yeah, sure. And so that's how that happened. So what we do is essentially where for us it's really important that women are in the driving seat of all of this. So we're in the east of the bridge. One of the things we want to do is have like a driving school program where we encourage women to take up roles that wouldn't traditionally take up roles. In shacks, I'll rarely see women driving. Especially, I rarely see women doing any sort of work outside of the farm. So if we could train 6 women to drive one of those lorries that takes the tea around and then become a clerk or a karani, as we all know it, east and west of the ridge, that would change a young girl's life. It would equip her with the skills it would equip her with the visuals that she could do something that's slightly different. She could do tea, but she could do tea in a very different way. So that's women in tea. So I want to move back to talking about tea globally. I was in London a couple weeks ago, or maybe about a week ago actually, and I did a quick tour of lots of different stores. I went to Harrods, I went to Fortnum and Mason, I went to Witters and Chelsea, and I went to Liberty. And those are all super high-end stores, right? The way that tea is sold, it's sold in two ways. It's either sold as the little canister that you can see over there, or it's sold behind a counter, and it's a premium top shelf product. So they have a tea there from Nandi that is £300 per 100 grams, right? Yes, £300, and it's a white tea from Nandi. I was really upset because they couldn't tell me where in Nandi it was from. All they knew it was a white tea from Nandi. And then when I went to Fortnum Mason, and that was the only tea that they had from Kenya. Other than that, there was nothing else. But they had all these Chinese teas, these Indian teas, all these Japanese teas, but there's nothing from Kenya. So what was going wrong? What are we not doing that? What's going wrong? When I went to Fortnum Mason, it was even sadder. All I found at Fortnum Mason is they said to me that they used to buy tea from Kangaita Tea Factory in Kirinyaga, and they have a bulletin for the last 3 years because they fought it out with the brokers, and that's it. And so that's the reason why Fortnum and Mason don't carry Kenyan tea anymore. And they were selling it at £7 per 100 grams. So there is a real gap here, and I wonder, and I guess I don't know if there's anyone in the room who is in a decision-making position. But I asked the question, what are we doing wrong? Why is it that Kenyan tea is being sold and then being packed on elsewhere? The last picture there is the blue canisters. It's a company called Ibada Tea Lauder. And I think they're either of Somali origin or of Lebanese origin. I can't quite tell which one it is. But that particular tea, on the back of it, all it says is, this tea is from west of the Rift Valley in Kenya. But we know nothing else about it. We don't know if those farmers earned a premium. We don't know anything else about it. But the tea was packed in the UK. And so the people who are packing this make more money because we're selling tea at what, $1, $2 per kilo? We don't even value our product. But yet, 70% of the women are the ones who are doing the labor. So what are we saying about the society that we live in if we're selling tea so cheaply, if we're selling it at such a low price? Okay, I want us to think about a tea industry where we make bank. We are the highest earner of tea. What would that do for our taxes? What would that do for our hospitals? What would that do for our schools? All of this from the humble community as well. What would you do if the government said to you, we can either pay you a premium just because Kenya produces so much tea and it's paid at a higher price? So I think I was also mentioned that I started a group called the Young Tea Growers. And basically what happened is, I think I mentioned that the only reason why I ended up in tea is because a politician tried to steal from my family. I moved to Kenya. I got frustrated. I reached out to somebody that I need, all the tea. And I said, hey, can you help me start this group because we need to meet other people like us. So since I started it last year, May, as sort of a joke, and in January, we went to PT Factory. And I go where there's a couple people in here who are from the group. So if you're from the group, and when we went, the one thing that happened is everybody was just, their eyes open. Though that's the one thing that people kept saying. They were like, wow, I didn't even realize that this thing that I've been planting my whole life and this farm that I've inherited has so much value. And then we went to the KTDA factory. We understood why the prices were the way they were. And the reason why I encourage farmers to visit your factory is because you are the only people who can tell your factory leadership about the operational inefficiencies. So farmers, go to your factories all the time. Let them be that person who is, when the watchman sees you, watch your wakulize, oh, as they ask me when I go to my factory, they're like, oh, sasa mipja kona nani leo? The FUM has a hard time because I always ask him hard questions, and that's our job. We are shareholders of a factory. We need to, as shareholders of that factory, the tea industry is ours. It's not anybody else's. We can't keep letting people sell our commodity and selling it as a commodity and sell it as this thing that's invaluable. But yet 70% of the women are the ones who are picking this tea and being paid the fittest. Like, I've met women pick tea and they tell me that, yes, Watani for Majani chai, but they don't even have money for sandwich hotels. But yeah, I was in London a couple of weeks ago buying tea for £22 a kilo. How? How does that make sense? It makes no sense at all. So, anyway, it's a call to action for all of us. The future of Kenyan tea starts with us. Every single one of you in this room is now officially an ambassador of Kenyan tea. So, everywhere you go, you must talk about Kenyan tea. Don't talk about Kenyan tea as the commodity. Talk about Kenyan tea as this magical thing. Add a story to it. You see how the Chinese and the Chinese especially created something called Natsai Suchong. Natsai Suchong is basically black tea smoked with pine wood. We could literally get a Muguma tree that falls and then smoke black tea and then call it Muguma Special. And then we sell at $700 a kilo. I encourage you all to use your networks to create new market opportunities. Everybody is connected to the internet in this room because that's how you found out about this event. There is no reason why we should not be talking about Kenyan tea as this prized possession. In the same way that the Japanese have established a 700-year-old tradition of brewing and steeping and matcha and these things. There's no reason why we can't do the same. There's why we can't tell our stories. There's no reason why we can't talk about how our great grandmother was plucking the tea and then she was hand rolling it and then she was steeping it. Those are things that we don't deem valuable, but to the rest of the world, those are the things that are valuable. Thank you.